But here's the thing, it's all starting to pile up for him now. Go back to what I said before about some people dislike him because he's a Muslim mayor, and some people only like him because he's a Muslim mayor. And I would say that something very significant is a problem under his watch as a Muslim mayor. And that is the issue of grooming gangs. As we've come to know them, there are a lot of other names that we can call them that are more appropriate, that probably won't work on YouTube, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's a big thing in the UK. And what we've learnt is over the last at least 3 decades or more, primarily men of Pakistani and Muslim origin have been abusing young British girls. That includes young British Asian girls. And Khan, as a Muslim, is not a believer that his London may be infested with these gangs, but it's all kind of falling apart for him. And I want to play you a video. I think this is really interesting, this video. And what this is an exchange between him and Susan Hall. So his Conservative opposition in City Hall. And they did this weird dance about the issue of grooming gangs, right? Where she was scared to say that the grooming gangs she was talking about were primarily of Pakistani and Muslim origin. And he was being deliberately facetious. He wanted her to spell it out so he could call her a racist, right? Have a listen to this exchange. I think it tells you about his ducking and diving, but it also tells you that the opposition should have been more direct. But have a listen to this.
Sonia, can she define what she means by that?
Yes, if you look at what's gone on in Rotherham, where there are people taking young girls, grooming them for sex, that is what I'm talking about.
We know in London there are issues about exploitation of young people, but they're not as defined by the member in her definition of what those types of gangs are.
So are you saying we haven't got the same sort of gangs that are in Rotherham, Bradford and lots of other places in the country?
Just for your misunderstanding, what does she mean by that?
You know full well what I mean by that. It's all over the television. You know exactly what I mean by that. These gangs of people that are grooming young girls for sex. Do we actually have those in London?
Today we need to give a full answer. Can she be clear what she means by that? I'm not clear what she means.
How much clearer do you want me to be? Look at the gangs that they've uncovered in other parts of the country. Do we have those gangs in London? It's a simple question. The answer is very simple. It's yes or no. I'm not asking you where those gangs are because the police might not want them to be disclosed. I'm asking you, do we have those sort of gangs in London?
I'm not sure why she's so nervous to say what she means. What do you mean?
No. I am saying exactly what I mean. I'm saying, have we got any of those grooming gangs in London?
I'm unclear, Chair, what is meant by the question. If she could spell it out, I can answer.
I've just spelt it out. Are you not listening? It's the sort of gangs that groom young girls at a young age for sex. Exactly how much clearer do you want me to be?
Well, I tell you how much clearer. And I speak as someone who believes that we should name a problem. You needed to be much more clearer. You needed to say that what I'm talking about is gangs of Pakistani and Muslim origin. And of course, that is not all men of Pakistani or Muslim origin. That is a ridiculous suggestion, but that is what those specific grooming gangs refer to. And she knew that she daren't say it because he'd go in on the "you're a racist." Some interesting comments going on here. What does she mean? The disrespect? Yes, that's the point, is that he has no respect for women, even though he's a proud feminist, remember. He's a proud feminist. But the thing is that actually that exchange took place before the whole thing exploded this year. And so what happened this year, of course, there was a whole thing on X where Elon Musk and Elon Musk didn't get involved in the whole grooming gang thing because he cares about impoverished and abused females. No, not at all. He got involved because he's not a fan of Muslims, right? That's why he got involved. So whatever the reason was. But anyway, so that was what I disliked about that, was the flippant response. That was something very serious. And they were doing this dance, right? That is about the systematic abuse of girls, right? And young women. But he wasn't the only one who was doing it, right? Also, this man, Mark Rowley, who is the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, did the same thing. Both of them danced around the idea that there were grooming gangs as we've come to know them in our capital city. Okay. The problem is people knew he was lying. People didn't believe the commissioner any more than they believed the mayor, right? They were doing all this dance around. And so what happened? The whole thing kicked off again. And then various investigations took place. And suddenly the Metropolitan Police announced that they were reviewing 9,000 such cases. But that is only following the public saying, we don't believe that in our capital city, there's no grooming gangs. That then they were forced to do something about it. So I would hazard a guess there's probably more than 9,000. That's what they're giving us, this piecemeal. And there's a very good investigation, which actually was conducted by the Daily Express and their sister title, My London. And it's actually just over the last couple of weeks. And it was into the issue of whether there really are grooming gangs in London. And the fact is that there is plenty of evidence to suggest that young girls have been abused and trafficked in the way that we've seen in Rochdale, in Rotherham, and other parts of the UK. And so what happened was then it all kind of kicked off, and then a national inquiry into grooming gangs was launched. And then after that, Khan came back out and said, there are no reported cases and also no indication of the grooming gangs that she is concerned about in London. Right. And he said, I have no indication of them being in London, but the Met Police understands the importance of checking for the reasons that she knows. See, and this is a real problem. This is a real problem. As anybody knows about me, I just hate child abusers, right? I don't care what your orientation is. I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care anything about that at all. But SADIQ Khan is not the first Muslim who has denied the existence of grooming gangs. I worked with a Muslim man, and he absolutely was insistent that Maggie Oliver was a liar, and that there's no way that the police or local councillors would cover up for British Pakistani men abusing girls. So that's something that some Muslims believe. You know, that's a reality. And the mayor of our capital city should not be believing that. And here's the reason why. This investigation conducted by the Express and My London, what they did was they sent out freedom of information requests to every single council. And only one of the 32 boroughs that they sent FOIs to admitted that there had been a case as outlined of what a grooming gang is. And that was in Hounslow. And then when pressed, Hounslow Council said that there had been a 3-year police investigation relating to a single child in the area. But I know how this stuff works. I once did an investigation for I think it was the Sunday Express as opposed to the Daily Express, still owned by the same people. And the investigation was to do with the whole idea that children were being put into care, and then it was some sort of pipeline for them to be trafficked into abuse to lords and local councillors and stuff like that. So I was involved in not only writing the article, but researching it. And I contacted councils around the UK for their figures on how many children, were male and female, were running away per month from their establishment. They couldn't, people were not keeping records. Councils were not keeping records about children absconding from care homes. And a lot of those children were being abused, whether in a grooming gang situation or by your local lord. But these councils around the UK did not have figures to supply me of how many of their children, they were supposed to be looked after children, how many were disappearing each month. I mean, and returning, of course, but absconding on a regular basis. Can you imagine that? Do not keep records. And that's what's been happening, is a lot of the time they've not been keeping records. Now, why have they not been keeping records? It can't be that problematic to keep records of how many of child A who is absconding from this home. The homes themselves should have been doing that, but they were not keeping records. And so when all these 32 boroughs say that that they had not had a case, I don't believe them. I just don't believe that they were either keeping records or it's part of the cover-up. And this investigation found 11 potential victims of grooming gangs. And when the Express investigators showed it, for example, to Maggie Oliver, she said that everything that was outlined had all the similar traits that she had come to know about what a grooming gang was. And then, of course, guess what? Mark Rowley did a U-turn, because that's what these people do. And suddenly, he's a politician, Mark Rowley, even though he's like the chief cop, he's still a politician, right? But suddenly didn't want to, from not wanting to discuss this whole idea of group-based child sexual exploitation, and voted down proposals for a London inquiry, he suddenly wanted to talk. Extraordinary. And suddenly Rowley was telling us that there was a significant number of cases being reviewed as part of the Home Office initiative. In fact, as he later said, 9,000 cases. And also, it was really interesting that SADIQ Khan gave an interview to ITV. Now, ITV famously have shied away from anything to do with grooming gangs. And I speak as somebody who worked for ITN, and ITN is the main news provider for ITV. And whenever the issue of grooming gangs was raised, my editors were not interested, said that it was not a significant number. It was only motivated by racists and bigots who were interested in that. Well, ITV has almost systematically refused to cover the issue of grooming gangs, and it's similar to BBC. But Khan gave his interview to the BBC in which he said, I'm going to be transparent about this. And he was outraged that people were claiming that he wasn't transparent. He was outraged that, and I'm going to quote him, that he didn't like it that people were pretending as though he was ignoring the plight of grooming gang survivors in London. And he said that it was duplicitous and disappointing. But he kept going on about how I'm pushing for transparency. No, you weren't. You haven't, because the one thing you did is you denied that there was an ethnicity issue to these grooming gangs in London. And one of the exchanges at City Hall, he was all about, oh no, this is county lines. Listen, girls and boys are being trafficked to do with county lines, which is the drug running. But that doesn't mean there aren't these British Pakistani grooming gangs either. And he didn't want to accept that. And now he's being forced to. And that actually is people power that's done that, because the politician, and don't forget, he's a Labour man, and Labour are absolutely complicit in the grooming gang scandal. Absolutely, they are. And one interesting character who has emerged that was potentially involved in the grooming gangs, not Asian at all, is Levi Belfield. And Levi Belfield, of course, serial murderer, horrible individual who was eventually convicted for the murders of Marsha MacDonald, Amélie de Lagrange, and Millie Dowler, rather. And it turned out that it's highly likely Levi Belfield was actually involved in an Asian grooming gang in Hillingdon in London. Here he is. Don't you just want to do unmentionable things to this individual? He actually lived down the road from me where my dog he lived in the street where my dog walker lives. So now what we have is London police, Metropolitan Police, are now forced, finally, after people power, to start looking into the issue of grooming gangs and who may have been involved. And Levi Belfield may very likely have been involved in a child abuse ring. And Levi Belfield became known as the bus stop killer. And together with convicted sex offender Suraj Garu, were 2 of 7 men alleged in a 2018 report to have been part of a child sex abuse ring that had at least 17 victims and operated for well over a decade in West London. And that case is one of 24 examples that Express and My London investigation have come up with. It's some powerful stuff. It is some powerful stuff. Now, I'm not going to read you each and every case that this investigation has come up with, but it is chilling when you start to go through it. And so what you have, for example, I'll give you an example. In Haringey, you have child O, age 12 at the time, raped multiple times by multiple men, right? Then you have Chloe, And so child O was said to have been abducted, beaten, assaulted by multiple men to Finsbury Park. She was said to have been plied with alcohol over a period of time. She was said to have had numerous pregnancies, numerous miscarriages, as well as giving birth. She was 12 years old. That's one example. Then you have Chloe, known as Chloe, but not Chloe, in Croydon, child in care, aged 11, who said that she had been subjected to a similar thing, and she died. She died. And the review into her death described how the professionals called her spiteful and defiant and suggested, this is so outrageous when I read this, that she was putting herself at risk with older men. She was 12. It was your responsibility to protect her. Then you had Sylvia, again, not her name, in Kingston, just down the road from me, who was found dead from a drug overdose in 2021. The review into her death shows there were concerns about her being sexually exploited in a gang situation from the age of 13. And she had these like so-called relationships, because that's why it's called grooming gangs, because these girls are groomed. Oftentimes they come from broken homes or dysfunctional homes, and they meet these men, and these men take care of them for a period of time, kind of make them their girlfriend, and buy them clothes and make them feel good about themselves. And that's where the kind of idea of grooming gangs come from. But we all know it's so much more than that. But there are so many throughout almost every borough, whether it's Lambeth, Hounslow, Newham, Lewisham. And actually Lewisham is interesting because it's kind of outside the idea of the grooming gang demographic that we've become used to. And that is, in Lewisham, it was revealed that there were gangs of Eastern European men who were taking up these women from Mallory School. And these gangs were waiting outside, and then these girls were being trafficked. And so that's quite interesting. So I think when there is a discussion oftentimes about how we're going to tackle this, is it going to be about gang related abuse, or is it going to be to do with Muslim Pakistani grooming gangs? It needs to be both. We need to understand if there are very specific demographics and what they're about and why they hold these attitudes towards females. British females primarily. Why do they hold such attitudes? And there's so much more. It's in Lewisham, it's in Islington, in Redbridge, where there was a child sex ring, in Tower Hamlets, where there was an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. And they found that 12, 13-year-old girls were being taken to hotels for parties by gangs of men. This is London-wide. Many councils have been forced to apologise for letting these children down. Many of these children were in care. And a number of the councils, including Lewisham, including Haringey, declined to even comment. So it's a real issue. I suggest we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to gang-based grooming in London. And we do need to know the demographics of these men. We cannot shy away just because our mayor is a Muslim. We cannot. It's outrageous that we do. And that is what's been happening. And that's to the detriment of these girls. You could see why some of them killed themselves. They simply couldn't take anymore because they felt that everything was against them. Nobody believed them. The police didn't believe them. The authorities didn't believe them. The authorities were writing reports where these girls are leaving themselves wide open to older men. They're encouraging older men, calling them sluts, all manner of stuff in these reports. Terrible, terrible stuff has been done to young girls and young women in our capital. They have been systematically unprotected. And I blame all the mayors for that, because all the mayors will have been around when that has been happening. But the problem is the buck stops with the current one. And he refused for the longest period of time to even acknowledge it was happening. You cannot resolve or solve a situation unless people acknowledge it's happening. So when you are a survivor of those situations and the actual mayor, a powerful man like the actual mayor, is denying that they even exist, that's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous.